By the end of 1934, prior to the formal announcement of the Luftwaffe's establishment, Germany possessed fewer than 600 combat-ready frontline aircraft. However, when the Second World War began, 30% were single-engine fighters, and over the next 6 years, a compact yet robust aircraft, the Messerschmitt Bf 109, would serve as the cornerstone of the German fighter fleet. This legendary machine remained in continuous action from 1939 to 1945, and in doing so it shot down twice as many aircraft as any other fighter in history. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 saw action in all theaters of war, and in the initial 2 years of the conflict, it virtually single-handedly decimated the majority of European air forces. With a production exceeding 33,000 units, the 109 emerged as the most prolific fighter aircraft of the Second World War and ranked as the second most abundant aircraft in the annals of military aviation. Over a 10-year period, a total of 9 main variants and nearly 80 sub-variants were produced. Ongoing enhancements ensured that the aircraft maintained its formidable combat capabilities right up until the conclusion of hostilities. Even with the introduction of the exceptional Focke-Wulf 190, the Bf 109 remained the German aircraft destined for unparalleled fame, solidifying its status as the most renowned aircraft ever constructed in Germany. The story of the Bf 109 began in 1933, when the German Air Ministry initiated a competition to seek a replacement for their current biplane fighter, the Winkle HE-51, as a new frontline aircraft. The tactical requirements for the RLM specified a single-engine, single-seat pursuit fighter to be developed and made ready for evaluation by the end of 1935. The new aircraft was required to be equipped with 2 fixed machine guns and had the capability to reach speeds of up to 400 km per hour. Development contracts were placed with 4 of Germany's leading manufacturers, aero, Winkle, Focke-Wulf, and Bayerische Flugzeugwerke. Each produced its own design, and after a series of evaluation trials, Willy Messerschmitt Bf 109 was chosen to become Germany's standard frontline fighter. Meanwhile, in England, 2 new British aircraft had conducted their inaugural flights, the Supermarine Spitfire and the Hawker Hurricane. Since both fighters were armed with 8 Browning machine guns, the RLM decided to increase the armament of the 109. An additional weapon, firing through the propeller hub, supplemented by the 2 existing nose-mounted machine guns. In December 1936, the first batch of 109s were sent to Spain, where they were tested in combat by the Luftwaffe's Condor Legion. They achieved immediate success, demonstrating their superiority over all other aircraft in the Spanish Civil War during the initial 2 months of combat. Made up of volunteer pilots, the Condor Legion fought on the side of Franco's nationalist forces. Adolf Galland, who would later emerge as an exceptional fighter ace with 104 victories and became Germany's youngest general, experienced his first combat in Spain.
I flew the Winkle 51 biplane, but this was at the time already an obsolete fighter. And therefore we used it only for direct support, strafing, and bombing.
The Spanish Civil War marked the end of the biplane era and the dawn of the monoplane fighter. The concept of a cantilever aircraft with enclosed cockpits was entirely novel, leading experienced pilots to view the new Messerschmitt with a degree of skepticism.
Fighter pilot in a closed cockpit is an impossible thing, because you should smell the enemy. You could smell them because of the oil they were burning.
Back in Germany, the first available 109s were delivered to the first and second routes of the Richthofen fighter wing. As the 109 pilots gained experience, they began to develop a new and more effective fighter tactic known as the Schwab. A quartet of flying aircraft in a loose formation were considerably less susceptible to attacks compared to the conventional grouping methods. Employing a formation pattern reminiscent of the splayed fingers of an outstretched hand, each fighter within the Schwab formation offered protection from the one position behind it, ensuring that all four aircraft enjoyed optimal visibility.
Nach meiner Ansicht nach war ein Fehler, dass das Fahrwerk.
In my view, one drawback was the placement of the undercarriage near the canopy. Occasionally, especially for inexperienced pilots, this configuration could cause the aircraft to veer to the left during takeoff. We had many accidents because of this.
Im Gegensatz zur 109, zur FW 190.
In comparing the 109 to the FW190, its undercarriage was on the wings. There was a wider span.
Dealing with the Messerschmitt on uneven surfaces posed an extremely perilous challenge, often resulting in trainee pilots losing their lives during the inaugural flights.
Beim Start, das war ja das Problem.
One problem was, especially for inexperienced pilots, when taking off, insufficient attention to acceleration as the tail lifted and the propeller began to turn could often lead to the aircraft veering to the left. Once that happened, there was nothing you could do at all. It was a major problem, and it happened quite frequently.
On numerous occasions when pilots had completed extended missions, returned from a day of combat, and were called back for another mission during takeoff, the aircraft would veer off course, crashing directly into the barracks. This happened many times. By 1938, a European war was inevitable, and German rearmament continued apace. 109 production expanded dramatically, and by the end of July 6th, more fighter groups had been re-equipped. In October, the initial highly productive variant emerged, powered by the Daimler-Benz engine, known as the Bf 109E. Known as the Emil, it had a maximum speed of 570 km per hour. It was armed with either 2 machine guns and 2 cannons, or 4 machine guns and 1 cannon. On September 1st, 1939, Germany invaded Poland, and 200 109s spearheaded the attack. The Polish Air Force found itself severely overmatched, and within a month of the invasion, it had suffered the loss of over 200 frontline aircraft. It's difficult to say that there were significant differences between the Messerschmitt and other aircrafts. They were very much the same. The difference, more or less, was due to the pilot's competence.
Die Mi-109 war nicht ein.
The Me-109 was not a very large fighter plane. In fact, it was one of the smallest planes. It was a single-seater, flexible, fast aircraft designed to hunt down enemy aircraft. That was the main role of the Me-109.
Aufgabe der Mi-109.
The Luftwaffe casualties in Poland included 67 Me-109s, but most of these were lost to ground fire. The first clash between the new German fighter and the Royal Air Force came on September the 3rd at Poland-Sputen. 2 Wellingtons from the No. 3 group were shot down whilst making an attack on the German battle cruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. On September 13th, 109 successfully eliminated 5 additional Wellingtons in an attack on the cruisers Leipzig and Nuremberg. 5 days later, a separate formation of 24 Wellingtons from Squadrons 9, 37, and 149 embarked on a reconnaissance mission over Wilhelmshaven and Schillig roads. Intercepted by Me-109s and 110 destroyers, 10 of the British machines were shot down, and another 3 were badly damaged. It was much the same story when Hitler invaded France and the Low Countries in May 1940. Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg were all defeated in quick succession, and the French Armée de l'Air was no match for the Luftwaffe in either organization or equipment. 16 fighter groups with more than 1,000 Bf 109s were deployed in support of German advance. In less than a week, France had lost more than 3/4 of its total fighter strength. Despite the dispatch of a limited number of Hurricane squadrons by Britain to provide assistance, their presence was too insufficient to significantly impede the tide. On May 23rd, 109s engaged in combat with RAF Spitfires, marking the first instance when German pilots confronted substantial opposition.
No, I would like to say, and many pilots who went on missions will agree, that at the end of the day, it was very much to do with who is sitting at the stick.
Es kam immer auf den Mann an, der
We experienced that during the Battle of Britain, British pilots shot down German pilots and vice versa.
auf Bretten erlebt, dass britische Piloten.
It all depends on the pilot,
Ich meine, es kommt immer wieder auf den Piloten.
what sort of trainings he had received, how good he was. Was he faster than his counterpart? That was the problem.
But the Spitfire would remain a deadly enemy, plaguing the 109 throughout the whole of its career. As the Germans advanced through France, RAF Spitfire and Hurricane squadrons provided air cover for the British Expeditionary Force during its retreat to Dunkirk. Commander Douglas Bader, who had re-enlisted in the RAF after losing both legs in a 1931 air crash, encountered 109s over the Channel during the Dunkirk evacuation.
I shot one fellow down at Dunkirk. He must have been a beginner like myself because he stayed flying absolutely straight and level while I shot him down, you know, without moving. We didn't have air superiority, but we had enough. The Germans left Dunkirk and went on to Paris and so on, which was a great mistake of theirs, really. We lost quite a lot of airplanes at Dunkirk and some jolly good pilots. But they managed to get back quite 300,000 men, I think, from the beaches. There was a lot of people. Absolutely dead calm sea.
Nonetheless, despite the successful evacuation, by the end of June, the RAF had incurred the loss of more than 500 fighters. France had capitulated, and Germany had achieved complete air supremacy over Western Europe. While the Luftwaffe regrouped for the invasion of Britain, a number of improvements were made to the Me-109E. Wing-mounted machine guns were abandoned in favor of the MGFF cannon, and power output was increased by using the new Daimler-Benz 601N engine. Armor plating was added to both pilot's seat and the canopy area immediately behind his head. In an effort to increase the operational range, provision was made for 300-liter drop tanks to be carried externally. Fighter-bomber variants were modified to carry either a single 250-kilogram bomb or two 450-kilogram bombs using a fuselage-mounted rack. The 109E compared well with the contemporary Spitfire, but nevertheless, it had its shortcomings. Robert Stanford Tuck, an RAF ace who got his first killer Dunkirk, had experience of a meal.
I flew the first one we captured in 1940 at Farnborough, which is a test establishment of ours, as you know. And we did a comparison trial between this first Messerschmitt and an E, Messerschmitt E, and a Spitfire Mark II. They were very comparable in their performance, but I thought the 109 going downhill fast was very stiff on control. There was too much metal strutting and reinforcing around, which restricts your vision very, very much.
By the summer of 1940, more than 2,500 German aircraft were ready to attack Great Britain. Based in France, the Low Countries, they began the main assault on August the 13th. With the aim of achieving air superiority, the Luftwaffe's bombers targeted airfields and radar stations across the entire southeastern region of England. They caused extensive damage, and on the first day alone, the RAF lost nearly 60 aircraft on the ground. During the opening phase of the battle, the German bombers were escorted by twin-engine Bf-110s. They were hopelessly inadequate, and before long, 109 fighter units were being assigned to protect both the bombers and their escorts. Messerschmitt Bf-110 proved to be a mistake, as both Douglas Bader and Adolf Galland would later testify.
The Germans thought it was very good. Actually, it was an absolute gift for a single-engine fighter.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I think the Lightning was an equal mistake. The P-38 pilots are angry with me about this statement.
But the Bf-110 is not the only problem for the Luftwaffe. The 109E variant had a restricted range of just 400 miles, and its operational time in the skies over England amounted to slightly more than 15 minutes. No longer able to function independently, its effectiveness against the British fighters was greatly reduced. In the initial week of September, Goering altered his tactics by shifting focus away from attacking Britain's airfields and instead concentrating on the city of London. The RAF was granted a respite, and on September 15th, Fighter Command managed to assemble a force of 300 fighters to intercept the most extensive bombing raid of the battle. In the ensuing Malheur, Spitfires and Hurricanes outnumbered the 109s by a ratio of 2-to-1, and as a result, 60 German aircraft were destroyed. After 2.5 months of continuous fighting, it was a demoralizing blow. In spite of all their efforts, the Luftwaffe had failed to knock out the radar system or to suppress the RAF. Within 48 hours of September the 15th, Hitler had postponed the invasion of Britain indefinitely. As the battle eventually concluded in late October, Germany's losses amounted to over 1,700 aircraft, which included 610 Bf-109s. In April 1941, Hitler attacked Yugoslavia and Greece. As the war spread to Africa and the Middle East, the 109 was specifically adapted in order to cope with the predominantly dusty conditions. To minimize engine damage, a sand filter was fitted over the supercharger air intake, and the resulting tropicalized version was designated the Bf-109 Trop. In June 1941, Germany launched Operation Barbarossa in the invasion of Russia. The opening attack was supported by 450 Bf-109s. While a third of these aircraft were E variants, the rest of the force was made up of the latest 109 model, the Friedrich. The F incorporated a number of improvements, many of which resulted from the experience gained in the Battle of Brittany. The inclusion of a larger propeller spinner and a revamped engine cowling minimized air resistance and bestowed the aircraft with a significantly sleeker appearance. The incorporation of rounded wingtips and the elimination of tailplane support struts enhanced its performance and increased its operational ceiling compared to the Emil variant. In the initial 2 days of Operation Barbarossa, the Luftwaffe's 109Es and Fs successfully downed over 300 Russian aircraft. Hundreds more were destroyed on the ground in a series of well-timed attacks on Soviet airfields. By the end of the month, German pilots have claimed more than 4,000 Russian aircraft, for the loss of only 150 of their own.
Yes, I can remember all of my battles. These are memories one never forgets. I had 22 confirmed hits. I can remember various situations. One was on September the 15th in Riga. I shot down 4 aircraft in one day. 1 plane in the morning, and another 3 in the afternoon, all in one go. It happened within minutes. I would say that as a pilot, you have to have good reflexes and a good overall view of what's going on up there.
Sicht für das, was sich in der Luft abspielte. Ja.
Meanwhile, on the Western Front, the Supermarine Spitfire was keeping pace with the development of the 109. Although it was much less maneuverable, the 109F could outperform both the Spitfire Mark I and II. But in the spring of 1941, the Spitfire Mark V made its first appearance. Equipped with a new and more powerful Rolls-Royce engine, it was an immediate success, and as soon as it arrived in squadron strength, the balance between the Spitfire and the Bf-109 was quickly restored. It was a question of who had the most powerful engine. The stronger the engine, the better the airplane.
That was a handicap with our planes. We always had weaker engines than the English, and therefore slower planes.
For the RAF, the Spitfire Mark V proved an equality that was very short-lived. Later in the same year, the Luftwaffe took the lead once more with the introduction of the radial-engined Focke-Wulf 190. Known as the Butcher Bird, it could outclimb and outdive any opposing fighter. and in a dogfight with a Spitfire Mark V, it could engage and disengage almost at will. The Focke-Wulf had a very powerful engine, and in itself was a very robust, well-built machine. It could cope very well with being shot at, probably more than the Me-109.
The Focke-Wulf had an air-cooled engine, and the Me-109A liquid-cooled engine, which meant that should any shrapnel cause damage to the cooling system of the liquid-cooled engine, then the battle would be over, whereas with the Focke-Wulf, with its air-cooled engine, would continue.
The Focke-Wulf was also much faster close to the ground, that is to say below 6,000 meters. But above 6,000 meters, the Me-109 was considerably superior, and, as most air battles took place at low levels, the Focke-Wulf usually had the overall advantage. The aircraft was also much sturdier than the Me-109, but had some peculiar characteristics. For example, during certain flights, because of the cooling systems were better at higher speeds, some engine overheating occurred. This could sometimes lead to stability of the aircraft being affected. Also, the aircraft had a nasty habit of pulling to one side or the other. Sometimes this is almost impossible to control. The British response to the Butcher Bird was extremely rapid. By the end of the year, Rolls-Royce had produced a new two-stage supercharged and intercooled engine, the Merlin 61. When it was fitted to the long-nosed Spitfire Mark IX, it transformed the situation completely. Although similar in appearance to its Mark V predecessor, the Mark IX became the definitive Spitfire. It was a vast improvement over the previous versions, and with this dramatic increase in performance, it was more than a match for either the 109F or the Focke-Wulf 190.
And the Spitfire 9 reigned supreme for the rest of the war. It was better than the 190. It outclimbed it, outdid everything.
The Spitfire was superior, but it all depended on what sort of technical tricks the enemy came up with, and to get one better.
Eingebaut hat, die andere Maschine leistungsmäßig zu überrunden.
When the Spitfire 5 was introduced, there was no doubt that we were superior with our 109. We were faster, and also we were able to fly very low so that the Spitfire couldn't catch us. But then, new models of the Spitfire were brought out with newer and better engines. For instance, the Rolls-Royce Merlin, and therefore, they took the lead again as they were faster and could fly higher.
Sie waren schneller und sind höher gestiegen. Jetzt haben wir uns überlegt, was machen wir? Wir haben ein Zusatzgerät für 2 Minuten Flug.
We have to quickly develop something better. So he brought out a water methanol injection system to cool down the engine. And that was an improvement of 60, 70, 80%. And once more, we were faster than the Spitfire.
Die Engländer haben dann von uns Motoren, die dort niedergegangen waren, bei Bauchlandung.
The English would take our planes, which should have been shot down, examine them, and try to copy the engines.
Entschuldigung jetzt den Ausdruck, aber es war eben bei uns.
After copying and improving the engines, their engines were again more powerful.
Und die Engländer haben den Gegenschuss gemacht, haben das nachgebaut und verbessert, hatten grundsätzlich etwas stärkere Motoren als wir. Mit dem Schuss sind sie noch.
Once more, the English had caught up with our design. They had unlimited amounts of quality materials, especially their steel, to build better engines than we could, because we didn't have any steel. That's why we occupied Norway to get high-quality steel for our production.
Als wir Deutsche, die ja eben einfach den Stahl nicht hatten. Deshalb wurde auch Norwegen besetzt, um hochwertigen Stahl zu bekommen für die Kriegsprodukte.
And that was not enough.
Aber es hat ihm nicht gereicht.
To many of the Luftwaffe's experienced pilots, the F4 model was the ultimate 109 variant.
Es gab ja in den verschiedenen Typen.
We have had various types. That was the Messerschmitt E, which was the one involved in the Battle of Britain, and then there was the F, which was used in Africa.
Noch eingesetzt worden ist. Das soll angeblich, ich habe sie nicht geflogen,
It was supposed to be the most attractive of the 109s. After that, the Messerschmitt nickname became the Bull because of the large indentations in it to accommodate the machine guns.
Durch hat man dieses schöne Wort gesagt, die Messerschmitt ist die Beule, ja. Und
there was one version of the Messerschmitt which even had to carry a bomb on the dome of the aircraft. But I always thought the 109 was really a fighter plane and should not be used as a bomber.
War die 109 ja eine Yachtmaschine und kein Bomber, ja. Und ich, wie gesagt,
Personally, I enjoyed flying it greatly and had no problems with the aircraft at all.
sehr gerne geflogen und ich kam wunderbar mit dieser Maschine zurecht.
The F variant served with almost every unit in the Jagdflieger and produced some of the highest scoring aces on both the eastern and western fronts. On September 1st, 1942, while on escort mission in Africa, Hans-Joachim Marseille set a record at a 109F when he destroyed 18 British fighters in a single day. During the whole of the month, he shot down a total of 62 machines, and by the time of his death on September 30th, his personal scores stood at 158 British aircraft. But even this number seemed relatively small when compared with the tallies of Gerhard Bachhorn and Erich Hartmann. Serving with JG-52 on the Eastern Front, both men amassed more than 300 combat victories. They were the most successful aces of the war, and the only two pilots to ever shoot down more than 300 enemy aircraft. Hartmann was a strong advocate of tactics and became the highest-scoring fighter pilot in the history of aviation. He followed the well-tried methods of many First World War aces and preferred to attack an enemy only when the odds were heavily in his favor. He summed up the advantages of having superiority in numbers by coining the phrase, "Too many hounds are the death of the hare."
That means that one duck never catches a rabbit. But if lots of ducks are behind one rabbit, then they got him.
Hartmann's experience as a fighter pilot spanned 3 whole decades. In World War II, he flew over 1,400 missions and had combat in more than half of them. He shot down 352 enemy aircraft, all on the Eastern Front and all while flying the Me-109. The secret of his success lay in always maneuvering to gain the advantage.
Have no clouds, have to no clouds, try to get in the sun and start from the sun you attack. Do you have clouds? Then I tried to go downstairs that I have the enemies clear in the sky under the clouds and try to get exactly under the airplane, then come up with full power, and he cannot see you because he has wings, he protects you, you get them down. The next step is go away after you get the skill and watch again the whole area, what's going on, and decide for another one or go home, make a coffee break. I told my pilots always, only if the windshield is filled up with the enemy, then pull the trigger. This saves you a lot of ammunition.
But in spite of its high speed and good performance at altitude, the 109F was never built in really large numbers. In May 1942, it began to be replaced by the next 109 variant, the Gustav. Powered by the Daimler-Benz DB605 engine, the new machine had a better performance than the Friedrich and a better armament, but it was far heavier and much less maneuverable. Nevertheless, it was built in enormous quantities, and for the next 3 years, it would form the backbone of the Luftwaffe's fighter force. By the end of the war, 10 main subtypes had appeared, including rocket-firing fighter bombers, 2-seat training versions, photographic reconnaissance models, and a whole series of fighters equipped with both pressurized and non-pressurized cockpits. Fastest of all of these versions was the 109 G10, with a top speed of 690 km per hour at an altitude of 7,500 meters. The Gustav was eventually followed by both H and K variants, but neither of them supplanted it. It was destined to serve with every Luftwaffe fighter unit in every theater of war. As demand increased, the yearly production rate for 109s rose sharply. In 1942, approximately 2,500 machines had been built. During the following year, the number was increased to 6,250. But the peak came in 1944, when the Messerschmitt factories combined with numerous subcontractors produced the staggering total of more than 13,000 aircraft. First deliveries of the 109G went to JG2 in the Channel Coast area and were used in high-altitude interception role, particularly against Allied bombers. By 1943, the American daylight bombing campaign was increasing in intensity, and many 109 units were withdrawn from their theaters to cope with the threat to Germany.
The types of missions depended on the situation. If only a few fighter planes were approaching, we would fly our 4 aircraft. But if there were more than that or whole groups, we would fly with 8 to 12 planes.
The autumn of 1943 produced some of the Luftwaffe's most notable victories over the U.S. bomber force. On August the 1st, 55 heavy bombers were shot down during a raid on the oil installations at Ploiești. 2 weeks later, the Americans attacked the industrial centers at Regensburg and Schweinfurt. Both targets were well beyond the range of Allied fighters, and the unescorted bombers had to face the full fury of the Luftwaffe for 2 hours each way. 60 B-17s were lost on the first raid on August the 17th, and almost a month later, another 60 bombers failed to return from a second crippling raid. 109 pilots used a variety of weapons and tactics against the unending streams of American and British bombers. Some fighters were equipped to fire 21-centimeter rockets from beneath each wing, while others flew above the bombers and dropped 250-kilogram bombs into the large formations.
Es stimmt, man war immer bemüht, alle Kampfflugzeuge zu verbessern.
They were always trying to improve all the fighter planes. It was the same with the enemy. For instance, with the Boeing Flying Fortress, we had to find new weapons to combat it. That's why we even tried to fight the enemy with rockets, which were hung underneath the wings. The Messerschmitt 109 was at the time the standard plane of the German Luftwaffe, and the only fighter plane which we could use and which we were very successful with, because there was no other plane which could compare with it.
Und konnte auch deswegen nur so erfolgreich sein, weil es keinen Vergleich mit anderen Typen gab.
Teilweise im Raum Güterbock statt.
I was stationed for a while near Guterberg, and was with the JG-304 group. I was a so-called high flyer.
Sogenannte Höhenjäger wurden wir bezeichnet.
We were moved around quite a lot in the West. When the Arnhem and Neumagen affair happened, I took it very personally. Then I was shot down near Recklinghausen.
Angelegenheit Arnhem-Nimwegen war. Und das waren für mich persönlich.
I have to say that these missions were the most depressing experience I have had in my entire life as a pilot.
Das bedrückendste, was ich in meinem ganzen Fliegerleben erlebt habe.
When you are flying a very heavily armored aircraft, you had to attack transport planes, i.e. gliders, etc. You knew there were human beings in there, and it was really the worst experience.
Segler schießen musste, wo man wusste, sie sitzen voll Menschen.
Meanwhile, on the Eastern Front, Hitler had launched Operation Citadel. Aimed at destroying the Russian forces deployed in the vital Kursk salient, this large-scale offensive became the single most decisive battle on the entire Eastern Front. 2,500 panzers were supported by 8 German fighter groups equipped with both 109G and the Fw-190. Between them, these units managed to destroy nearly 450 Soviet aircraft during 7 days of almost continuous fighting. But in spite of the success, the German advance was halted. Kursk had become the turning point, and for the rest of the war on the Eastern Front, Hitler's panzer armies would be permanently on the defensive. By 1944, Russia had re-equipped with much improved aircraft. The new Yak-3 had a maximum speed of 720 kilometers per hour. while the Sturmovik 1L2 was given a rear gunner and two 37mm cannons. Both aircraft were capable of taking on either a Focke-Wulf or Messerschmitt on roughly equal terms. With the arrival of the G-series, the Me-109 had reached the limit of its development potential. Operated weaponry had led to an inevitable increase in weight, and although they were fast, the later models were becoming less maneuverable and much harder to handle.
At first, they had 2cm cannons, and then 3cm cannons which fired through the propeller. Many pilots found that the only disadvantage was that the 3cm cannon couldn't shoot fast in succession. And though it would have been better maybe to have only one cannon which could shoot faster. For example, during missions, I hit targets on the ground using the 3cm cannon. And I must say, the impact was enormous. The 109 had two heavy machine guns which shot through the propeller. That is what we had at the flying school.
From 1943 onwards, 109 pilots had to contend with one of the most powerful fighters in the Second World War, the Republic Thunderbolt. With 850 caliber machine guns, the P-47 had unrivaled firepower. Its R2-800 double wasp radial gave it a high top speed, and if it was fitted with drop tanks, it had enough range to reach far into Germany. Francis Gebreski flew P-47 with the 56th Fighter Group and became the highest scoring American ace in Europe. His 28 confirmed kills, including 10 Focke-Wulf 190s and 10 Me-109s.
It was a sturdy airplane, built like a tank, and I could drive it through most anything. It was more than a match for the Focke-Wulf 190. It was more than a match for a 109. We had water injection that was sustained power to keep us there for about 3 minutes, up to 5 minutes, depending upon how you use it. But it gave us that tremendous edge that we needed against the German Luftwaffe.
While the Thunderbolt made a major contribution to the daylight bombing campaign, its effectiveness as an escort on long-range missions was limited by the need to carry drop tanks. Allied losses fell dramatically with the introduction of the first truly long-range fighter, the P-51 Mustang. Powered by the Rolls-Royce Merlin 61, it was superior in speed to the 109G at any height. Above 28,000 feet, it can outpace an FW-190 by nearly 70 miles an hour. It could outdive the Focke-Wulf and the Messerschmitt, outturn both of them, and outrun the 109 with ease. But most important of all, it could do all of this over the German capital itself. The Mustang could fly all the way to Berlin and back. The new machine joined the Thunderbolt groups in increasing numbers. Before long, Germany was losing fighter pilots far quicker than it could replace them.
Die 109 ist dann auch nur in der Reichsverteidigung noch eingesetzt werden, sollte durch den Schuss, den sie noch...
The 109 was mainly used to defend the Reich.
Die englischen Spitfire. Und als dann die Amerikaner kamen mit ihren Mustangs und...
When the Americans came up with their Mustangs and Thunderbolts especially, which had fantastic climbing and flying abilities, we could not compete.
Derart fantastische Steichleistungen und Flugleistungen in der Höhe erhalten, dass wir einfach nicht mehr mitkamen.
Those pilots that were available were being sent into action with the barest minimum of training.
By the middle of 1944, the Luftwaffe's dwindling supplies of aviation fuel had reached crisis point. In the weeks that followed D-Day, more and more airfields in northwest Europe became readily available to the Allies. In August, the Americans broke out of Normandy and began the long advance eastwards. The German fighters were hopelessly outnumbered, and those that survived the initial attacks were hammered relentlessly, both in the air and on the ground. As he began to disintegrate, the Luftwaffe mounted one last major operation, codenamed Bodenplatte. On January 1st, 1945, 800 fighters took off for a surprise attack on the Allied airfields in Holland, Belgium, and Luxembourg. By the end of the day, they had destroyed nearly 200 Allied aircraft at the cost of 100 Focke-Wulfs and Messerschmitts. It was a tactical disaster, since, while the Allied aircraft were quickly replaced, the loss of 100 pilots only served to weaken the Luftwaffe still further. On April 7, 1945, 120 109Gs supplied by a special unit known as the Sonderkommando Elba took part in a suicide mission against a large U.S. bombing raid. Escorted by Me-262 jets and piloted mainly by volunteered novices, the sole purpose of the 109s was to ram the American bombers. 8 B-17 Flying Fortresses were hit before the American fighter escort could intervene. But out of the original force of 120 Messerschmitts, only 15 returned to base. The Bf-109 had taken part in its last large-scale mission of the war. With the Luftwaffe effectively defeated, the Allied air fleets had total control over the skies of Germany. British and American fighters and bombers ranged freely and were able to hit any remaining targets at will. One by one, the German generals surrendered their armies. The final capitulation took place on May 7th, and with Göring himself a prisoner of the Allies, the resistance of the Luftwaffe finally came to an end. "50 years later, there was only one genuine airworthy survivor of the G-series, Black 6. Built to G2 standard at Erler's Leipzig factory, the machine was delivered to 3JG-77 on October 21st, 1942. During its short operational career, it served in the Western Desert with Rommel's Afrika Korps and was flown by a veteran of the East Front, Lieutenant Heinz Ludmann. On November 4th, Ludmann was making an attack on a British bomber force when he was intercepted by 2 Curtiss P-40 Katyhawks. In the ensuing dogfight, Black 6 was hit in a tailplane, propeller, and canopy, and its pilot was injured in the head. Ludmann managed to fly the aircraft home, but it was so badly damaged that it had to be taken to a repair depot to the southeast of Tobruk. Nine days later, it was captured by an Australian unit, and within a few weeks, it had been transported to England by ship. During the next 2 years, the design was analyzed and the machine was flown in simulated dogfights against a number of Allied fighters, including the Spitfire, Mustang, and Mosquito. After the war, it was put into storage and moved from one RAF base to another until it finally deteriorated into a wreck. In 1972, a small team of volunteers began an enormous task of restoring it to a full flying condition. And after 2 decades of painstaking work, Black 6 flew again for the first time in over 45 years. Painted in its original desert colors and bearing the wolf's head crest of JG-77, it is the only genuine German World War II combat aircraft flying anywhere in the world today.
Willy Messerschmitt's fabled Bf-109 was manufactured in greater numbers than any other production aircraft. Almost 34,000 were built. Usually referred to as the Me-109, at the time the aircraft was conceived, it was designated the Bf 109. B because the maker was located in Bavaria, and F because the company was called Flugwerk. It was only when Willy Messerschmitt gained full control of the company that the ME prefix was assigned. Throughout the 30s and during the Second World War, Willy Messerschmitt endured a dogged relationship with Erhard Milch, who had gained high position with the fledgling state airline Lufthansa and later with the German Air Ministry, more often known as the RLM. A close friend of Milch was killed piloting a Messerschmitt-designed transport plane, the M-20, on its first flight. Milch was to blame Messerschmitt over the accident, a grudge that was to last for years. Fortunately, Messerschmitt had cultivated a relationship with Hermann Göring, who ultimately became Milch's superior. To get his first Luftwaffe fighter contract, Messerschmitt's Bf 109 had to compete with an advanced Winkle design, the HE 112.
There's no question the Winkle aircraft was the better looking aircraft. But, and incidentally, when it came to the test pilots at Rechlin, they gave the 112 the better report, considerably better over the 109. But Udet decided that he was under pressure to produce numbers of aircraft rather than quality. And he realized, quite rightly, that the 109 was far easier to produce in numbers than the 112. Basically because the undercarriage on the 109 was an integral part of the fuselage. So the fuselage and the wings could be produced separately and then joined at a later date.
In the end, the competition was won by the 109 and a legend was born. The 109 first saw service in Spain. Along with other modern German aircraft like the Stuka, the 109 was tested in actual combat conditions. The lessons gained would later be applied to a much larger conflict in the skies over Britain. In Spain, it became clear that the 109 lacked range and endurance. Its slender lines made for greater speed, but left little space for fuel. One possible solution to this problem was to use the Bf 110 to tow the smaller 109 to the combat area, thus preserving its limited fuel for fighting. Novel though the idea was, the towing technique proved impractical for all but glider warfare. However, a few years later, when Germany was suffering from the relentless heavy bombing of the US 8th Air Force, the 109 was employed as a test aircraft in towing a unique glider fighter concept offered by the Blum and Voss company. The BV-40 was a very low-cost fighter glider that would have been coupled to a Bf 109. When the tiny Blum and Voss design was in a position above the American bombers, it was released to attack them, using its two 30mm cannons and their limited stock of ammunition. The BV-40 was so small its pilot had to lie on a mattress in a prone position. However, the BV-40 relied upon its diminutive size to avoid US gunners. Only 7 BV-40s were built before the project was abandoned, probably because the Me-163 was a slightly more practical and self-contained concept. 109s were also pressed into service for clandestine missions, dropping spies and saboteurs behind enemy lines. Special capsules could be attached to both wings, each containing a single parachutist. An often overlooked feature of the 109 was its system of leading-edge slats on the forward surface of the wings. These made for better handling and shorter takeoffs. Interestingly, the concept had been developed and patented by the British Hanley Page Company, and Messerschmitt had to pay for the use of the invention. The slats proved so successful that they were also used in Messerschmitt's 410 and legendary 262 jet fighter. The 262 had another link to the Bf 109, owing to the fact that the jet's nose wheel assembly is actually a single main wheel strut from the Bf 109's narrow gate undercarriage. The 109's narrow gate undercarriage was always a challenge when it came to landing or takeoff, even under normal conditions. At one point in the war, the Kriegsmarine had high hopes for its sole aircraft carrier, the Zeppelin. It was always assumed that the Zeppelin would be equipped with Stukas and 109s. The Stuka's wide gate undercarriage would have been suitable for aircraft carrier landings, but the standard 109 arrangement was not. Accordingly, Messerschmitt set to work to modify the wings so that the wheels could function in a more stable wide gate fashion. This aircraft was designated the Me 155. The Zeppelin never put to sea, and the 155 was abandoned, only to be later resurrected by the Blohm + Voss company as a very high altitude fighter concept. But this came too late to help an ailing Germany. Messerschmitt followed the 109 with the Bf 110. Although this later became successful in several other roles, it was never suitable for the long-range bomber escort mission. Messerschmitt quickly offered the 210 as an alternative, but this proved to be a failure, and so the Me 410 was rushed into development. As a precaution, in 1942, the company was ordered to develop a backup aircraft based on existing 109 parts and using two fuselages, which enabled the creation of a totally new aircraft employing a minimum number of new parts. The Me 109Z Zilling was made as a single-seat, very long-range, heavy fighter. It might have shown great promise if the two prototypes had not been badly damaged in an Allied bombing raid. This loss demonstrated that Germany needed a homeland defender more than a bomber escort at this stage of the war. In addition, the Me 262 jet was close to delivery, and this groundbreaking design could have been a real game changer if they had arrived in time. Possible proof of the Me 109Z's viability came with the US North American P-82 twin Mustang. Independently, the German designer of the P-82 chose to follow exactly the same approach as the Me 109Z. 270 twin Mustangs were actually produced and served in Korea and the United States as night fighters. In another pairing, Bf 109s were flown with other aircraft during the Mistral missions. These occurred when Germany's fortunes were declining and the Wehrmacht were looking to develop a new type of flying bomb. The concept would use a disposable unmanned bomber filled with explosives, but guided by a piloted 109. Gliders were first used to prove this concept, but eventually two-engine bombers were employed. The Bf 109 was produced in greater numbers than any aircraft in history. It served the Luftwaffe and other air forces well, and it proved more than an adequate fighter for Germany until it was supplanted by the Fw 190. Even then, it remained in active service and production until the end of the war. The Bf 109 was one of aviation's great planes.
If you enjoyed this video, please remember to like and subscribe. And as always, thank you for watching.